Daniel Sports Center, we go over a college football game preview and prediction on the 2022 Camellia Bowl matchup between the Georgia Southern Eagles and the Buffalo Bulls. Both teams have had good seasons getting to this point, and it's a pretty even matchup as well. Should make for a good one. We'll be over a full game preview and prediction on this matchup here today, starting with their team trends. Georgia Southern beat App State to finish out the regular season. 51-48 was the final score. That was a high-scoring shootout, went into double overtime. Georgia Southern gets the win in the end. What a great win to finish out the regular season for the Eagles. But as for Buffalo, kind of in a similar situation. They won their last game of the regular season, but both teams actually had a very similar pattern down the stretch heading into their final game of the regular season. Both teams were coming off of 3 straight losses. So at one point in the season, both these teams were 5-3. Then both teams were 5-6 heading to their last games, and so it was a crucial final week of action for both teams. But both teams got the win and got up to 6-6 in the end. Buffalo beat Akron 23-22. That was a very close game, but they got it done in the end. And that would have been a terrible loss to finish out. I mean, considering Akron went 2-10 in the 2022 season. Games be on Tuesday, December 27th in Montgomery, Alabama. Your kickoff is noon Eastern. Spreads going with Georgia Southern by 3.5, over under 67.5. And the FBI is also going on Georgia Southern's side, 57%. So the Eagles are favored by just about a field goal for this matchup. Series history, it's actually the first game between Georgia Southern and Buffalo in both teams' histories. Stat comparison for this one: Georgia Southern 34th in points per game, 117th in points allowed. They're 5th in passers games, 77th in rush yards. And then for yards allowed, not so great, 114th in passers allowed, and then 129th in rush yards allowed. So, I mean, long story short, for Georgia Southern, this team is a strong team on offense. They've performed generally well on offense this season, especially in the passing game. But when it comes to the defensive side of the ball, this team has been poor to say the least. They're allowing an average of 32 points a game, which is 117th in the FBS. And for yards allowed, this team is the 3rd to worst rush defense in the country. And then they're 114th in passing defense. So this team has allowed a whole lot of yards this season. And points to go with that for sure. But if you're looking at the bright side here for Georgia Southern, this team is a strong team in the passing game. You got Van Treese, who's had a great season, nearly 4,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 15 interceptions. The more I think about it, I just realized this. Kyle Van Treese played for Buffalo last season. He was actually a Buffalo transfer, and he's now with Georgia Southern this year, so he's actually facing off against his former team in the Camellia Bowl. This actually is a pretty intriguing storyline here, and something that definitely should be mentioned. But he's had plenty of success with the Eagles this season, nearly 4,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. So he's thrown a few too many picks this season. If he could have thrown fewer interceptions this season, that would have really looked good on his stat line. But, I mean, otherwise, he's had a good season. And if you look at his time with Buffalo, he was with Buffalo for 5 seasons. So this is, that it wasn't just a short-term thing that he had with Buffalo. He was with the Bulls for 5 years, and he got up to 1,800 yards last season with the Bulls, 8 touchdowns over 6 picks. So this is far and away his best season that he's had in college football to this point, and it comes in his last season. So that is obviously key, and this is all the more interesting, I'm sure, for him going against his former team of 5 seasons. But as for Buffalo, they're 56th in points per game, 58th in points allowed, 65th in passers game, 76th in rush yards. And then for yards allowed, they're 43rd in passing, 80th in rushing. So nothing really stands out for Buffalo. I mean, this team is a pretty consistent team on both sides of the ball. They're a really balanced team, quite honestly, especially statistically. I mean, they're getting an average of 29 points a game, which is pretty good. And they're allowing an average of 27 points a game, which could be better, but isn't terrible. And I mean, defensively, this team is pretty good against the pass. And on the offense, you got the starting quarterback, Cole Snyder, who's passed for over 2,700 yards, 17 touchdowns on the season. So he's had a pretty good season as well for the Bulls. That is something to keep in mind. Recent matchups: Georgia Southern beat App State 51-48 in double overtime, lost to Marshall 10-23, lost to Louisiana 17-36, took a loss to South Alabama as well by a touchdown, but beat Old Dominion a couple weeks before that, 28-23. As for Buffalo, they beat Akron 23-22, lost to Kent State 27-30 in overtime, lost to Central Michigan 27-31, lost to Ohio 24-45, but they beat Toledo, who turned out to be the MAC champion, 34-27. So once again, both teams were pretty similar down the stretch. They won on October 22nd, but both teams took 3 losses before their last win of the season, which got them into bowl eligibility. Key points for this one: Georgia Southern 6-6 offensively. They got power, though they are a bit inconsistent. I mean, if you look at how they played against Marshall, that's a perfect example of that. I mean, they only scored 10 points against Marshall, couldn't get anything going against them, but then the next week they score 51 on App State and get the win in double overtime. So, I mean, it's an inconsistent team, but it's definitely a team that I think has got a high ceiling. It's just been the defense that has held this team back a bit, allowing an average of 32 points a game. And it's going to be tough to be a contender when you're allowing that many points a game. And then you got Kyle Van Treese, who's nearing 4,000 passing yards. He's had a very successful season for the Eagles. And once again, it's even more interesting when you realize where Kyle Van Treese has played the past 5 seasons. He's been at Buffalo, and here he is at Georgia Southern. He gets to play against his former team in the Camellia Bowl. It couldn't have fit more perfectly for him. But then for Buffalo, this team, they are a more consistent team on both sides of the ball. They really don't stand out in either area, but they're decent on both sides. They have to be strong defending the pass here, that's for sure. Kyle Van Treese has had a very successful season, and that's how Georgia Southern has had success offensively, is in the passing game. I mean, if you look back, Van Treese back. I mean, if you look at the October 15th matchup against James Madison, he had nearly 600 passing yards in that game. That's how big of an impact he has had on this team this season. Then for Buffalo, after starting 0-3, this team has improved quite a bit over the course of this season. So definitely a very interesting matchup coming up here in the Camellia Bowl. Let's get to the prediction for this matchup. And I'll be going with Georgia Southern to get the win here, 34-20. It's my predicted final score. This one went back and forth on a few times, but I just think Georgia Southern is the better team in this matchup. They've been more promising down the stretch. I know both teams have taken some losses down the stretch, but I just think Georgia Southern, this offense, I mean, they're a more complete team. Defensively, it's come back to bite a few times, but I like this offense to get it done in this matchup. Kyle Van Treese going up against his former team. I think this is going to be a game where he wins, and Georgia Southern wins this one by 6, 34-28. So I'll say 55%. I still could see this one going either way, over under 67.5. I'll be taking the under for this one and Georgia Southern to cover the spread in the end. But that said, let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this matchup, and I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.